Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the front brake pads and rotors on this 8th generation Nissan Sentra. I'm going to give you a ton of helpful information, so make sure you stay tuned throughout the whole thing, just like this. 21 millimeters. Turn the wheel towards me. Simple tips like that. See where I got the jack and a jack stand. This is the lifting point. Take a look at everything, see what you're going to end up taking off. 4 easy bolts. Caliper, bracket, and the other bracket bolt. Those are the 4 bolts we're going to end up taking off to remove all the brake parts. 14 millimeter. You might need to hold it like that, but this one was just fine. The torque on these is very, very light. So with the crescent wrench, don't need much to loosen these up. If it is hard to loosen up and you end up ruining these threads, you might as well replace them. Don't try to fix them, just replace the nuts and bolts while you're here. Remove the caliper. Set it up on the strut mount or the strut assembly right here. Don't let it hang on the brake hose. I've never seen it break, but just not good practice. 17 millimeter. These are your brackets to the knuckle bolts. 17 millimeter will get them off using a 3/8 and a 6-point socket, or a 3/8 drive ratchet and a 6-point socket. You will find links in the description below to purchase all the tools and parts shown in this video as well. When we reassemble everything, we will go over the torque specification. That's pretty important when you're doing a proper BJ. You always want to make sure everything is tightened properly. If you over tighten bolts, that's a bad one. If you under tighten, obviously that's bad as well. Remove the rotor. One thing that you're going to do better than me when you do your brake job is clean off this hub assembly right here. The flat surfaces where the rotor are going to meet, clean everything off with like a Brillo pad or a green Scotch pad. That's one thing I don't do, and it's way better practice. I'm going to start doing that. I just keep forgetting to do it. I've never had the problem, but make sure you do that. Before we go too far, you want to make sure the brake fluid reservoir, the cap, is off. So when you press the piston back into the caliper itself, the fluid has somewhere to go. It doesn't cause a leak somewhere else and make it work a lot harder, or really harder than needed to. Grab the brake caliper compression tool. This is a really cheap one. You'll find a link in the description. This one I believe was like 10 bucks, and it didn't take long to get here. So to get this job done, it doesn't take long. About 45 minutes to an hour when you have all the right parts. And the tools and the parts, everything to get it done, was probably less than about 250 bucks. If you see any like wet or moisture at this point when you're looking at the caliper, push the pad all the way in. You might have a problem, so double check. That's one thing you're always looking for. Look for moisture around anything. That's a sign or an indication that you have a leak. Put the caliper back up on the strut assembly. Just let it hang right there. Again, clean off the flat surfaces that are going to meet, so the rotor to the hub on the front and the back side, and where the rim is going to touch the rotor right there. I like to use one lug nut to hold the rotor in place. It keeps it from wobbling around when I'm trying to line everything up. Now, here is the brake bracket assembly. This is your pads loaded in the bracket. We're going to remove everything. At this point, you would obviously get new brake pads. I like to get new hardware kits when I replace my brakes as well. Wear indicator is on the inboard pad. That's one thing I would recommend for you as well. Wear indicator on the outboard pad as well. Make sure you take note of where your wear indicators are at, so when you put everything back together, you know where they go. I like to take a lot of pictures when I'm taking everything apart too, just so I have something to reference. This is where the hardware kit comes into play. These shims, or the silencers, whatever you like to call them, they'll always come in a new premium brake pad kit. So make sure you get those, always replace them. These are your sliders. You'll notice that the slider pin I just removed has a little bit of a rubber alignment grommet at the bottom of it, so make sure you don't get these mixed up. I like to use this brake grease pretty liberally, wipe off all the old stuff. If it's really hard to move in and out, make sure you clean out the cylinder of the bracket too before you go too far, but use this grease pretty liberally. When you put it back into the caliper bracket, make sure everything slides in and out freely. You don't want anything to be jammed or hard to move in and out. If it is, start over, do it again. You want these to move freely. This will make it so you get even pressure on the brake pad up against the rotor. Very, very important. Brand new caliper hardware kit going on. This is really just for an inspection and to show you guys how to do all this. Like I said, something like this, 45 minutes to an hour to get it done. Your first brake job, around 45 to 60,000 miles if you drive really hard and you brake really hard. So if you get to 80,000 and you're doing your first brake job, don't be surprised you need brakes. Now your rotor, again, it's just being held on there with that one lug nut. That's holding it in place so it doesn't wobble around when we're doing all this part right here, or putting everything back together. This is your bracket to spindle bolt. 17 millimeter, 62 foot-pounds. That's really not that tight on these. I see much tighter on most others. So 62 foot-pounds using a 3/8 torque wrench. 17 millimeter, 62 foot-pounds. You can see I go just to the first click using a 3/8 torque wrench and the 17 millimeter 6-point socket. Load the caliper with the pads. Make sure you take note where the wear indicators were when you're disassembling everything and put them back in the same location. You could put some grease right there and some grease right here, but not my forte. It should be pretty easy to put the caliper onto the bracket over your pads with the piston completely compressed into the caliper. So it should move around pretty freely. The rotor should be able to move around pretty freely. Don't be worried about that at this time. Tighten these caliper to bracket bolts up. 14 millimeter, 20 foot-pounds. Again, using the 3/8 torque wrench. 14 millimeter, 20 foot-pounds. That is a really, really light torque spec. So very important to use a torque wrench when you're doing a really good BJ. Do it properly, do it the first time, don't come back. Tighten it down to your first click. You don't need to go to second or third. I used to do that, but I was told that's not the right way to do it. And I'd highly recommend you do the same thing. If you need to, use your crescent wrench to hold the slider pin in place. Turn the wheel back onto or towards the passenger side so it's easier to get the wheel back on. Using my method to get your brakes done, you will not need to bleed the brakes. Don't forget to put the cap back on your reservoir and also pump the brake pads or brake pedal. Pump the brake pedal so when you go in reverse you have some actual stopping power. So you just want to pump the brake pedal until you get a nice stiff reaction on that brake pedal. If it never stiffens up, double check everything, make sure everything's legit and you're all good. But that's pretty much it on this 8th generation Nissan Sentra brake job. Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. I'll see you on the next hopefully helpful video.